this is Andy Aldrin. I run the Center for Space Entrepreneurship at Florida Tech, and I want to talk with you today about the past, the present, the future of commercial space. I call it the three waves of space commercialization. You know, one of the things that we tend to forget is we've actually done this before. We've had attempts to commercialize space on at least two other occasions. So first in the 70s and 80s, we had one attempt that kind of went nowhere. In the 90s, we had an attempt that we sort of got wiped out by commercialization. And here we are today. And I have to tell you, it's not entirely clear what's going to happen. I think there are a lot of positive signs and some things that have me a little bit concerned. So let's start by talking about the first wave. First wave was a wave that I said that just never broke. In the 70s and 80s, we were talking a lot about space commercialization. We were dreaming about space liners going to hotels in space. We were going to commercialize the shuttle with airline pilots flying the shuttle. We actually had the first commercially funded launch vehicles, the first commercially funded rockets. And a lot of people don't remember that. And we also turned over one of our primary Earth observation satellites from NASA to the commercial sector. Unfortunately, this all kind of came to an end with the Challenger accident, and the shuttle was sort of taken away from the potential commercial markets, and then just nothing happened commercially for a long time until about 1995, and I call this the wipeout. That's the time we got creamed by a massive wave. We were going to literally darken the sky with satellites. Teledesic was going to put up 900 and something satellites. We had about 10 other companies that were building satellites from anything from 20 to 100 satellites. We had 1,500 proposed spacecrafts with a combined investment of over $150 billion was being proposed. 13 different launch vehicles. This was going to be the commercial revolution. Unfortunately, it didn't really work out that way. Most of the companies actually never built satellites, and most of the launch vehicles went out of business as well. What we ended up with, though, didn't seem so bad. We actually put 130 spacecraft, 3 constellations, Iridium, Globalstar, and Orbcomm, and 3 different launch programs ended up out of this. However, even those programs weren't sustainable. They all went through some kind of bankruptcy or reorganization, and what was $10 billion of investment, of real capital investment, ended up getting sold in bankruptcy for $80 million. There's an old story about space which says if you want to make a small fortune in space, start with a large one. But this is ridiculous. This is insane. So that kind of put us in a period of what kind of the doldrums. And on the government side, things weren't going all that well either. So this is a chart which every one of these red bars shows a NASA program, a big NASA program, a lot of these multi-billion-dollar programs, tens of billions of dollars, that got canceled. The vast majority of programs that NASA proposed and ended up getting canceled. That was kind of depressing, and it kind of seemed like there must be a better way. And so the question now is commercialization going to be the better way? Is the commercial revolution going to lead to something that's very different? Well, in some ways, this wave kind of serves as a metaphor for that. It looks like it could be a great wave, and the guy's going to get totally tubed, or it looks like it might close out on him and wipe him out. And honestly, I'm here to tell you, we don't really know what's going to happen. I will say that there's a lot of positive signs, though. The biggest one is the appearance of SpaceX and Elon Musk. SpaceX has shown that there is a completely new way of doing business. Now, we've been talking about commercial space and in the launch industry. We've been doing things more or less commercially for a long time. But SpaceX is doing things entirely different in terms of they're not just building launch vehicles, they're building constellations, and they're doing this mostly on their own money. The government, as NASA in particular, is helping them a lot. But it does show us that there's a different way of doing business. And the future looks promising. I think reasonable market estimates say that by the 2030s, late 2030s, maybe 2040, we're going to be looking at $1 trillion industry in space. Now, a lot of that industry is on ground. A lot of it has to do with taking the internet through space. But still, space is going to be a huge part of the global economy. That's really kind of a positive thing. The other thing that I look at that I think is really impressive is the amount of investment that's going into space systems now. So over the last 10 years, there's been $177 billion of investment in commercial space systems. Now, 141 billion of that has been for applications that we do here on the ground. Only 30 billion of it is for actual space hardware. Now that kind of troubles me a little bit. I would like to see more investments going into satellites that are building things in space. But if you look at this, the $30 billion of investment, and now look at what the government spends on space. Over the last 10 years, the governments globally have spent about $720 billion on space. And most of that money goes towards infrastructure. So in terms of infrastructure development, the things that are really important, government is far, far bigger than commercial industry. But there are some other signs that are hopeful. So if you asked me at the start of this year what was going to happen with commercialization of space, I wouldn't have had a very positive outlook. With COVID, we thought, I think a lot of us in the industry, thought that there was real danger ahead. There was a real risk of investment just leaving space. But look what happened, right? We actually had by far the best year we've had for investment in commercial space. And that's a super positive thing. So here we are. This is, and it's shaping up to be, the next space race. And the possibilities are incredible. They're almost endless. We're going to have satellite systems in space that are providing internet at much, much lower latency. And lower latency means, well, for many people, it means better gaming. There are things that you're going to be able to do with space that will enable you to have the internet anywhere on Earth, anytime, at pretty rapid speeds. We're going to have satellites that are going to be producing imagery of the Earth, not just the visible light waves, but hyperspectral, which will be looking at 200, 300 bandwidths. We're going to be looking at radio emissions from the Earth. We're going to be looking at radar. We're going to be combining data from the Internet of Things, and all of these different data streams are going to be combined together to create information products that we can't even imagine now. This is the part of space, commercial space, that I find to be truly exciting in the future. But it's going to be a different world, really different from what I grew up. When I grew up, satellites took tens of years sometimes, they took hundreds of millions of dollars, and today we're building satellites that are built in months. Some satellites cost thousands of dollars, some cost maybe single-digit millions. The cost of putting a satellite into orbit has gone down by at least an order of magnitude, and that changes a lot of things. It changes the way you do manufacturing. The other thing that's happening is the diversification of investors. When I grew up, it was basically the government provided the vast majority of investment in space systems. There were a few commercial space operators of communication satellites, but the number of investors was very, very small and mostly governmental. Today, you're looking at hundreds, thousands, actually with some of the new investment vehicles, literally tens of thousands of people are investing in space companies today. So it's a very, very different environment. And in many ways, it's much more challenging than it was before. You're not just thinking about a small number of investors. You've got to think about a huge number of investors and operate much more like a commercial company. With the diversification of investors, you've also got diversification of customers. So as I was growing up in the space industry, you had a few government agencies. You had NASA, you had the Department of Defense, you had the National Reconnaissance Office, and that was about it in the US, and it was about the same story in most other countries, the countries that even had space programs. And so now you have thousands of customers that are going to be using space systems. Many, many more of which are going to be much larger participants. And so this is going to be a very, very different environment from what I've faced. And you all are going to be growing up in a very, very different environment. And finally, not are there just more competitors or more investors, customers, or more competitors. So the whole marketplace is just going to be vastly more complex and faster moving than anything that we have seen before. And so this is one of the areas that I'm particularly concerned about. You know, I grew up, and I have spent the last decade or two either training the future leaders in academic environments, in universities, running advanced programs. And I can tell you that as a nation in the United States and even globally, we do a great job training the smartest technical engineers and scientists, and we're doing a fantastic job of that. But what we don't do is train people to be leaders. We don't give people the breadth of understanding about the ecosystem of space, the economics of space, the business of space, the legal aspects of space. And without these leaders, we end up surfing like bulldogs. And a lot of bulldogs get to the shore. And some of them actually do a pretty good job. But this is the area that I really worry about, because I think we need to have smarter people running space programs if we're going to be successful in such a challenging environment in the future. So what I look forward to is actually training the next generation of not bulldog surfing, but silver surfers. And I encourage you all to take a look at what we're doing at the Center for Space Entrepreneurship at Florida Tech. We've got some great programs. I want to thank Amelia and MajorTim.space's for the opportunity to talk to you. And let's get out there and surf the space.